This is the 12th training video for the CARE program. This is going to go over lesson 12, which is problem solving part 1. If you look at the lesson plan in the teacher manual, you can see that the only materials that you're going to need for this lesson is the student workbook that students have been working out of, and then also that self-monitoring worksheet that students have been using to rank their individual situations every day. So make sure you have both of those. As always, we're going to start with a brief relaxation strategy. So either 30 seconds of calm breathing or muscle relaxation. Next, go ahead and have students review that self-monitoring worksheet and reflect on if their ratings have either increased or decreased over the week. Next, you're going to review that student goal that students set at the end of lesson 11. If you remember, lesson 11 was thinking traps and coping thoughts. So have students review that short-term goal, fill out the reflection question, and discuss those. And then finally, review that homework from lesson 11. And as I mentioned, the homework for lesson 11 was about thinking traps and coping thoughts. So there were 2 examples where students were given a thinking trap and they had to come up with a coping thought, and then they had to identify their own thinking trap and coping thought. So time permitting, have students share answers to those and some of the thinking traps and coping thoughts that they may have come up with. And then once you've completed that, you'll be ready to move on and teach lesson 12. And so lesson 12 introduces a problem-solving steps that students can use when they're faced with a problem at school. So we've split this kind of into 2 lessons. So part 1 really models what that problem-solving strategy looks like, and then gives students an opportunity to practice it together. And then we're also going to have students continue to practice this problem-solving strategy in the final lesson. But lesson 12 has 2 lesson goals. The first is we will identify the 4 steps of the problem-solving process, and the second is that we're going to apply the problem-solving process to school scenarios. So to get started, we're going to go over kind of a definition of what problem solving is. So on page 86 of your student workbook, we've got definitions for what problem solving is and how we can use it at school. And if you have time, you might have students share sometimes where they've used problem solving either at school or at home and how that's helped them in situations. And then we're going to introduce the problem-solving plan that lesson 12 teaches, which is called the IDEA plan. And so IDEA is an acronym where I stands for identify the problem, D stands for develop the solutions, E stands for evaluate the solutions, and then A is action, choose the best solution. So once you've gone over that, you can see we've got a little cartoon here at the bottom of the page. And go ahead and read this cartoon aloud to students. This is actually the situation that students are going to use, or that we're going to use to model the IDEA strategy for students. So in our situation, we've got Momo and his friend here. Momo would like to play basketball with him, but his friend won't share the ball. So go ahead and have students turn the page. This is on page 87 of the student workbook, and this kind of starts the modeling portion of the lesson where we're going to model how that problem-solving strategy can be applied to situations at school. So what we would suggest is that you walk through this with the students and make sure that you're reading all of the captions and such so that students really have a good idea of what that looks like. But these steps are on page 87 to page 94 of the student workbook. So first step is identify the problem. So we've got, it says before we can solve our problem, we need to identify what the problem is. And the reason that we have this step here is it helps students identify the actual problem. So sometimes when students are angry or sad, they may view the problem through a distorted lens. So if we look at the example from the workbook where Momo's friend won't share the basketball at recess, some students who maybe become angry may say the problem is that their friend is being mean. But that's not really the root problem. The root problem is he won't share the basketball. And so teaching students to identify that major problem lays the foundation for successful problem solving. So we let students practice this. So it asks students to identify what would they say the problem is in this situation. And there's a spot for students to write that down. Next, as part of that identify the problem, we also want students to be able to identify the perspectives of both of the students in the situation. And so you might remind students that you worked on this a couple of weeks ago as part of a care lesson. And so in this example, Momo thinks his friend is being mean because he's not sharing the ball, but he might actually, his friend might have a different perspective to that. So have students try and identify the different perspectives of both characters there. So, oops, went too fast there. So maybe his friend is having a bad day. Maybe his friend is worried that Momo won't share the ball. Maybe he didn't get to play basketball yesterday. So here are some other perspectives that other student might have that would affect how everybody is viewing that situation. So next, and this is on page 89 of the student workbook, we're going to move on to developing solutions. And so this is the step in the problem-solving process that's going to encourage students to brainstorm possible solutions to the problem. And so we want to really emphasize to students that during brainstorming, we're going to write down all the solutions that we can think of, and we're not going to worry so much about if it's a good solution or not, because we're going to evaluate or look at those solutions more closely in the next step. But when we brainstorm, we are just writing down all the possible solutions that we've thought of. And so if you look on the bottom of page 89, Momo comes up, he brainstorms 4 solutions. So he brainstorms, he could take the ball away from his friend, he could go get another basketball, he could play another game at recess, or he could call him a mean name. So he's brainstormed some possible solutions. Now, on page 90, we move on to step 3, which is evaluate the solutions. And so this is where we're really trying to look at the positive and negative outcomes for each of the solutions that we have identified within this situation here. And so one tip that we really emphasize to students is when they're trying to evaluate solutions or possible solutions, that they want to try and ask themselves 2 questions. Does my solution follow school rules? Because our solution should always follow school rules. And 2, is it practical? So is this something that I could actually do, a solution that I could actually choose? And asking those 2 questions can really help students evaluate the different solutions that they've come up with and pick one that is going to lead to a positive outcome. So on the next couple of pages, Momo really walks through evaluating these situations. So we have a little think aloud here so students can really kind of see what that would look like. So his first idea he came up with, he said, I could take the ball away from him. But Momo realizes that's against school rules and he could get into trouble. So that's probably not the best situation. The next idea number 2, was he could get another basketball to play with. And Momo said, hey, this would be a good idea and I wouldn't be breaking any school rules, but there aren't any extra basketballs for me to use. So this is an example of making sure that whatever when students are evaluating solutions, that they're actually trying to decide, is it practical? Can it actually be done? Because this is a great solution. This is a great possible solution for Momo to choose. But if it's not feasible, if there's not actually another basketball for him to go get, that's not going to work. And so that's something that you really want to emphasize to students. Idea number 3 is that he could play another game at recess. And so Momo realizes, hey, I could go play soccer with Johnny and Emily. I wouldn't get to play basketball, but he likes playing soccer, and he wouldn't get into trouble for breaking any school rules. And then finally, his last idea, which is idea number 4, was to call him a mean name. And so Momo realizes, if I did that, I would be breaking school rules. And if he calls his friend a mean name today, his friend probably won't want to play with him tomorrow. So once he's evaluated all of those, you kind of walked through all of those solutions, and kind of Momo trying to evaluate each of them, stop and have students reflect on what they think the best choice for Momo is going to be and why. And then finally on page 93, we go over step 4, which is action, choose the best solution. And so for this one, Momo chooses to go play another game, and so he goes off to find Johnny and Emily to play soccer. And he decides that was probably a good choice because he's having fun. And so finally on page 94, we just want students to briefly stop and reflect on the idea steps to see how they thought Momo did walking through those 4 steps. And so you can have students reflect about what about Momo's plan was good, and was there anything bad that happened because of Momo's plan. So the next 2 pages of the student workbook, which is page 95 and 96 of the workbook, has 2 examples, 2 scenarios that may happen at school, so that students can practice using those idea steps. You can have students work on these scenarios in small groups. You can complete it as a whole class activity. You can have students complete it individually. Whatever is going to work best for your students in your setting. And if you're running short on time, you may choose just one of the scenarios. You might look and try and choose the one that you think is most applicable to the group that you have. Or you could also complete the steps out loud. So instead of having students writing down answers for each of these, you could just walk through each step aloud with students to practice. So just know that those are some accommodations you can make, especially if you're running short on time. Finally, we are ready for our goal of the week. So remind students that they're writing that short-term goal. That's going to start with I will and include what they're going to do and by what date. And have them set a goal to practice something that they've learned in lesson 12. And then finally, quickly review the homework. So what we're going to be doing for the homework is we've got another scenario here, and they are going to walk through that idea problem solving strategy, just like we did in class, where they are identifying the problem and perspectives, they're developing ideas and then evaluating them, and then they're choosing an idea there. And so that's it. Don't forget to send home the parent handouts this week. I hadn't scrolled down to lesson 12 yet, but we did include within lesson 12, we did include the pages from the student workbook that walks the students through the problem solving process using the idea plan, so that if parents wanted to see what that looked like, they were able to have that as an example. So you might be sure to send that home, especially since students are expected to complete the idea plan with using that problem solving scenario or problem solving strategy. So you just might want to make sure, especially this week, that this gets sent home. Okay, that is it for lesson 12.